Hey, hello again there, friends and fans. Raptor here, and welcome back to new big news on City Skylines 2. This time more on emergency services, or really city services as a whole. Fire, police, healthcare, education, waste disposal, and trash, and of course, a little peek at seasons and weather events. Did you notice that one just there? Yeah. The weather in this game is looking gorgeous. I love all the buildings, and a lot of things are really looking good, although there are a few things I can complain about. Regardless, I love the fact that the developers have included what is known as extensions and sub-buildings that'll allow us to expand upon existing city services, and yeah, it's kind of nice that we can tie things to different districts rather than just having multiple hospitals. Now, of course, we can still do that, but it's nice that there's an emphasis on expansion rather than just duplication. And I think their approach to the new district system, where we can kind of click and drag nodes, almost like when you build a zoo enclosure in Planet Zoo, or really like when you use the Move It mod to be able to build roads and then drag them around in City Skylines. I think this is a pretty good approach, as the paint tool could be a little bit tedious, but I think we should get both options here, so that way we could follow a curved road or a highway to perfectly go along the edges of a district that might border a highway. But then also, of course, the district tool of making straight lines like that is quite nice too, especially when you're dealing with a coastal city that you want to create some little buffer zone between the water and the shoreline. But regardless, I think there's a lot of great stuff here to cover, including more on waste disposal and trash, which of course at any moment, if you pause this video, you can see every one of the screens covering things like the different policies and different things that we can do, for example, to recover some things for trash, or to slow down or make a quieter neighborhood. Now, we'll watch the developer talk a little bit more about this. Some of the developers mentioning things over the last few days have been incredible, and it's a really great wealth of knowledge, and it's nice to see their passion too. I mean, it's great to see who's actually making this game and the approach that they have for things a little differently than the first game. For example, going into more details about how, instead of it being desirability as a whole, each different type of demand, industrial, commercial, or residential, will have their own types of demands. Obviously, if a new neighborhood is opening up and people are just moving in for the first time, their demands may be different than a high-density residential area that is continuously expanding. We'll go into that in just a little bit. But if you notice here too, with the city services relating to road maintenance, you see this little road vehicle here, and we're about to get our first look at what winter will be like in the game. And I think winter, honestly, a little too clean. If you've ever... Oh, there's a vehicle fire too. Yeah, emergency services can be used to put out fires now, and the emergency services can be used for search and rescue during building collapses. But yeah, there's our look at winter, and I think the roads are a little too clean, but I do want to see snow accumulation like what we got in The Sims 3 for its seasons, or like in Sims 4. Let's not even get started there. But anyway, yeah, I hope to see a lot more on the seasons and the climates, and that's something coming soon. But it is nice to see that our city services may be used differently in different seasons. Obviously, during a wet season or a snowy season, there's going to be a lot more traffic accidents, and thus your road maintenance department, which is not only in charge of maintaining those roads, but also cleaning up after an accident. In other words, an accident occurs, emergency services show up to, police cordon off the area. Firefighters may show up to get somebody out of the vehicle or put out the vehicle fire, and then also, well, maybe a hearse will have to pull up, and then, also your city services for wreckers will have to show up, flatbeds, to take vehicles away. But it is kind of cool, something that I mentioned earlier in the channel earlier this month. We played a game called Emergency 20, or just Emergency, and both of those games, classic RTS about emergency services with police and fire and like medical rescue and search and rescue too, will all be put into play here. Now, a little less on the in-depth look that I wanted to see, but really, it's really cool that we can actually see our city services go beyond putting out a building fire or a forest fire, which they've confirmed here too. And something that I'm really hoping to see is the potential for a traffic accident where, if it burst into flame near a forest, could create a massive forest fire, which is realistic. Certainly something you want to avoid in your city, but if you have the correct services, it does show that there's the potential to have those things explode, literally, in exponential problems. And that's going to be how things go with your healthcare and your education too. Obviously, if you have a lack of some of those services, you're going to have some holes or gaps in your support of your citizens. And so the new buildings that they've announced, like the welfare office and some of the other schools, like adding higher levels of education, means that we can further support our people. And if they fall on hard times, they're not just going to move out of the city and be miserable and or just, completely abandon everything that you've given them, which is annoying in the original game. And they've also made moves to avoid death waves. So rather than huge amounts of people moving out because the tax rate is higher, well, there's a few things to talk about there. Of course, if we have somebody who is now no longer employed because you've changed the tax rate for commercial businesses and that business has moved away, the person then who's fallen on hard times can then go to the welfare office to, make ends meet until they get a new job, which is great because if they've moved into your town long ago and are highly educated and a good taxpayer, if they're pulling back from the system a little bit to then find a job elsewhere once one is available, you don't lose that taxpayer anymore. And you don't lose that person as a resident and another business is ready to go with them having education rather than having to wait another 20 or 30 years for them or somebody to move in, have a child, go through the education system, and then finally get a job. And then going back to what I was mentioning before about having all of your city services work as a whole, of course, then the hearses won't be as needed as much because death waves have been reduced. Well, of course, they'll be needed, but it won't be like there's huge waves going through the city. And so some minor changes and tweaks, some things around city progression that they've talked about, and just lots of stuff. I mean, we covered this when it was live on Monday. We did a video on this. Now, again, we covered it when it was live, and now I'm doing another video, and yet there's still more things to talk about. And my excitement is immense. My thoughts are everywhere. There's things flashing all over the screen, and I just couldn't be more excited. I mean, we're going to have to stream this game and play this game for 2 or 3 months until we really know everything that we can do in City Skylines before I feel like we hit limits to where even we start thinking about mods. But let's hear a little bit more from the developers on what they have to say about City Skylines 2 and continue to talk about all the new news. Let's go.
And today we're going to talk about city services. Okay, I guess I can just go blah 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 something. Yeah, blah blah blah. In general, the city services are overhauled for City Skylines 2. This time you don't need to place so many separate city service buildings to cover your city because of the better pathfinding as well as the new city service upgrades. All city services in the game include upgrades. These are operational extensions and sub-buildings. You can answer the different needs of the city by placing a new wing to your medical clinic that it'll add more patient places there, or a new ambulance garage, and so on. We have updated the district tool for City Skylines 2. In City Skylines 1, the districts were painted using a paintbrush. In City Skylines 2, we have a much more accurate polygonal tool that you can use to shape and create districts. The brush tool was a bit inaccurate. We heard from players that some people had some gray hairs trying to create the perfect district shapes. So this time we're going to give them the tools to create exactly what type of districts they want. One of my favorite district policies is the gated community policy, where you can dictate that who actually is allowed to move through a district. And if you want to keep the district calm from the heavy traffic, then you can use that policy to control the area, keeping the riffraff away. That's basically what it is. In City Skylines 1, the land value was more directly affected by the city services and especially the parks. In City Skylines 2, the land value is affected by the citizens and companies' willingness to move to an area and pay rent there. You can indirectly control the land value by placing services that those specific agents need at that moment, and that will in turn make them more willing to live in an area and pay higher rent, and that will then affect the land value itself. The road maintenance has a bigger role in City Skylines 2. This time the road condition doesn't only affect the speed of the traffic, but it also affects the likelihood of traffic accidents happening. So it's important to have an adequate road maintenance fleet so that they can keep the roads in condition. The road maintenance vehicles have two different models. one for the summer, and then it switches to a snowplow during the winter. Citizen healthcare is an important part of your city to keep it functioning. The citizen happiness is dependent on their health as well as their well-being, so it's important to build enough healthcare in your city and provide them in the places that the citizens need it. The citizen death care, on the other hand, is something else. As with many other things in City Skylines 2, also the citizen death and death care have been improved on. We no longer have the classic death waves that we had in City Skylines 1. Unless there is an actual house collapsing, the hearses don't clog your streets. But if there is a disaster, then you can absolutely expect that there's going to be a lot of buzzing in the streets. The garbage management has also been improved in City Skylines 2. We have now introduced a recycling option for the garbage, which then produces some materials that can be used in the industrial buildings in your city. We've also added a new feature to the landfill where you can actually create the area for your landfill yourself. And if your city is a small one, you need a smaller space, but if your city grows, you can then expand. As with many other systems, we have also improved education. The game features elementary school, high school, college, university, medical university, and technical university. We've also added a new level of education, and these education levels match the different demands for workplaces in your city. Fire and rescue has been also improved. The fire department handles building fires as well as the potential vehicle fire. They will also search and rescue people from collapsed buildings. The game also features postal services and internet services. The citizens want to send mail to their loved ones or maybe an angry letter to the editor, and this improves their well-being. The city also can have internet service, which will also improve the quality of life for the citizens, and it will also affect positively the profit margins of the companies. Watching the households, you can see the effect of the mail service availability and the internet service availability. If your city doesn't have the different emergency services yet, the outside connections will provide your city with the various services. They send out police cars, ambulances, and so on. The only downside is that it will cost you slightly more compared to if you had the service in your own city. The administration category is an entirely new service category in City Skylines 2. It features City Hall, Central Bank, and Welfare Office. Welfare offices help citizens with low well-being. City Hall and Central Bank provide the city with various citywide bonuses. I can be more happy, yeah, I can definitely be, because I'm like way too serious. Next week we're going to have electricity and water, and that was that.
Now, a few things from our last video on City Skylines 2 City Services. You guys brought up some great points about placing down some of these buildings and having them to be almost too large just at their base footprint. If you're going to be building maybe a small town outside of your big city, some of these police departments and clinics and whatnot might just be too busy with all the decorations around them, like a lot of parking spaces and a lot of territory and hedges and trees that are dedicated to a space that you might never expand upon. And so it would be nice if there were a way we could put down buildings without the extensions. And I feel like you guys made some very good points to that, where the clinic is small, the elementary school is quite large, and same with the police department, where it can be expanded immensely. But it is cool how we have the option to connect to outside services, where your police departments at the start don't necessarily have to house anybody in jail, and you can send off hardened criminals or regular criminals outside the city to other jails. And of course, that's how the game kind of simulates those types of things from the beginning, with water and power being very expensive to produce, but you can of course export the surplus, and that offsets the cost for that. So a lot of great points from all of you on that one. So at any point during these videos, if you have a thought or a question or something you've observed somewhere else, or even in the blog posts, or if I didn't get something quite right, or new details come around to something or about something, make sure you do mention it. I think you guys have some very valuable feedback there. And yeah, going back to what I was saying in our previous episode on this, telecommunications and communications too, with both the postal services in and outside the city and importing mail from outside the city, and then also telecommunications like internet connection to a server farm inside your city, means that we can make money from people and services that never have to travel inside or outside the city. In other words, we could set up a very good server farm and connectivity between businesses, and we can service even more customers that never have to travel on the roads. We never see them. They're never a part of any of our daily lives in the game, but yet they still provide us money, like for financial services. Now, there's a great breakdown in the game too for imports and exports. So things like concrete and steel can be imported or exported, and things like financial services and media can be imported or exported as well, to where at the beginning you'll be importing small amounts of that just to make your people's needs be met. But then you can start making your own and exporting those, and that's pretty damn cool. Going back to what I had mentioned previously about telecommunications, it seems to be one of the more hardly touched upon features in the game, where it does show that there's a few things outside of just the internet, like media for television and radio, that can also impact natural disasters. If you have a radio station, it can then broadcast the impending disasters, and if you're playing with natural disasters on, there is a chance that you'll encounter an earthquake or a tsunami, or perhaps a forest fire that breaks out from a traffic accident, like I mentioned before. And then, of course, this could help your people to go to shelter. And they did showcase that a little bit in the previous blog post that we talked about, how there are, of course, the emergency weather services that detect all sorts of different weather and things like tremors and seismic activity that can then tell your people to get into shelter. So if you'd like to play with the Natural Disasters DLC from City Skylines 1 in on this game, basically ticking that box can immediately allow you to do that. Going back to what we mentioned in our previous stream too, many of you had mentioned that the game will immediately have all tiles unlockable up to 441, and the developers have also confirmed that those tiles are smaller, but not sure how much smaller. 1% smaller, 10, 200%, who knows? I don't know. But I'm just joking. It is cool though that we can have up to 400 tiles and we can expand how we want, and that of course education does seem to have some sort of a way to generate those development points. And so building things like the technical university for the industrial businesses, or the medical university for your people's overall health, might also help to contribute to that development over time. Now again, they have elementary schools, high schools, college, and then university or specialized university like the technical college or the medical university or technical university as well. So seems like there's quite a lot more emphasis on education this time around, which I do like. One of my favorite things in SimCity 2013 was to try to build a highly educated city that would then create semiconductors or computers or televisions and try to make some actual electronics to export. And in this case, it seems like we could do that and also be like a tech giant where we can have our server farms and have people connect to us for online services, which is also very cool. But then going on to tourism, a lot of these buildings will be impacted by tourism as well, because of course, well, if you have a giant forest fire and a road that's completely blocked and not so great in quality, it's going to be hard for people to get into the town, and or whether you're using rail or air, or if you're using roads to import different people and things that they might want, like food and different types of services for your hotels and restaurants, might not make it for a good experience for the tourists. But going back to those imports and exports, yeah, I really like how they've listed it out. Some of these screens showcasing things like importing convenience food, like fast food, Wendy's and whatnot, and then also just standard food and vegetables. So at these farms, we might be able to export just more than just food. And we can, of course, sell it locally. So if you have a local farm and you have less people importing things, imagine that. If you have a city that's importing a ton of food via rail, that could be a lot of road traffic delivering that via car. But if you have a farm, then that's going to be coming from the farm and maybe your outside connections and maybe your rail connections too. So there's going to be less imports, which might save your businesses money because they're buying it locally, and a lot less traffic too. So literally by building a farm, it seems like it could be possible to then limit the import traffic on your roadways. And that's something that remains to be seen, is how much oil will be imported for the gas stations that are supported by the commercial businesses, and how much do we have to import? And if we do import, do we want to import it many different ways? How important will ports be, or airports, or rail lines versus regular roads? We're all going to have roads, and we're going to build a lot of them because they're going to be exciting, but I hope that all these new services and new imports and exports mean that there's a more emphasis on those previous things that we talked about in the roadway episodes and kind of the mass transit transportation. But it's interesting how we're talking about city services, yet showing more on how those services are used, to where the developers have also confirmed that things like police and fire and emergency services like EMTs, medical, can be provided from other cities off the map that might come in and help out your people during a disaster, or when you're just getting started and might not necessarily have a hospital built, when you just have a few clinics and way too many people. But it is really nice to see the developers' passion here and explaining about how all these buildings will be expanded upon. I'm now starting to think to myself how this will be implemented into DLCs and what kind of mods that we'll encounter here, because as I did cover earlier, there's going to be a lot of things to do in this game. Day one vanilla, everything from experiencing how the vanilla game will be played and getting all the achievements, and then trying to build a 1 million population city and seeing what disasters are like, trying to build a tsunami-proof city and see if that's possible. But then once we get done with all those things within about a year and build beautiful cities and coastal cities and desert cities, how many other ways can we manipulate that? And I'm excited for the next episode when they're going to talk about electricity and water more, to see if we could build maybe in a desert city, which is something they haven't really touched on too much, other than seeing snow today in the climate. But yeah, I hope that we can do something like damming up a giant, reservoir and being able to pull from that and make really diverse cities that have more city services than what you would think. Water and power is a city service, and in this they didn't really talk too much more about water or sewage, but it does seem like something that can be exported to the landfills that do have some upgrades to be able to recoup some of the materials that are thrown out. SimCity 2013 had this, where a recycling center could take some of the recycling from the city, whether it be plastic or alloys, and then reuse those in the industries to make semiconductors and TVs and computers. And I really think City Skylines needs something like that too. They will have that, where of course those can be, I think, just exported raw, but I hope they can be used by the industries too. And of course the policies for the cities, this is not something new. We have policies for the districts and the cities in City Skylines 1, but I hope there'll be more policies that go beyond the heavy traffic bans and gated communities and things of that nature. I hope we can still do what we could in the first game of making certain areas high tech. Now again, we have the European and the American tile sets, or the themes, where you can make a little America or a little Europe in your city if you want to, or just make it purely an American or European city with how the buildings and the city services will look. Although I've only seen one style so far, I'm fairly confident that all these buildings will have multiple styles, at least the ones that are not industrial. I wouldn't imagine that the nuclear power plant might look different for an American or a European setting, or perhaps the landfills or the waste processing. I think those will all look the same. But regardless, I'm really hoping that we get a much more diverse experience there, so we can build the cities over and over again. Same with rail stations and whatnot. But anyway, going back to what I was saying, I really hope and am thinking that we'll be seeing a lot of things to do, and eventually mods can expand upon that, as well as DLCs for different types of themes at the very beginning. And more road vehicles too. I hope we get more options for many different road vehicle types for maintaining our parks and our roads. That's some things that they have still yet to touch on. But regardless, one last thing that I really want to see in this game, a big wish, would be for things like coal and iron ore and other things like that to truly be brought in via train to our power plants and to be able to connect it that way, almost acting more like transport fever. To which, remember, City Skylines is a super expansion upon and an enhancement of a game known as Cities in Motion, which is why, if you've ever played that game before, there's certainly a lot of similarities between how all of the mass transit works in City Skylines and also Cities in Motion. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but you can tell that, of course, these people worked on that original game long ago. But I'm happy to see death waves being nerfed a bit. I'm glad to see that our people are a little bit more independent and a little more proactive in searching for new jobs and higher education and being able to educate themselves to something that might need to be filled or maybe more of their interest. And it certainly seems that because the people can now plan their own route driving, and now that they have more options for living in different income homes or different types of different areas with different desirability based on perhaps their education, that's going to be the deciding factor in this game, is both education, exports, and then filling in all of the needs for traffic because of those. More educated people probably create less trash and garbage. I would certainly hope that would be the case, and then would probably provide more exports because one person who's highly intelligent might be able to be more productive. And so making our roads more accommodating based on education is just fascinating, rather than it just being based on population. And I've seen a lot of you also mentioning that the population will be about the same as it is in City Skylines, where 100,000 is like the biggest possible achievement for, I think, unlocking new stuff. But of course you can go further and beyond that, and there might be more buildings that could be unlocked at a higher population. But of course we'll have those challenge parks where, have 100,000 people die all at once, or survive a natural disaster. Things to unlock the achievements and the unique buildings from the first game will likely be here too, and I hope they expand upon that as well. But happy to see more news on the telecommunication and more news on postal services and how those will, of course, be a thing that can be imported and exported, as well as raw resources like steel and oil, or imported too, and then that some of these things more than likely can come in via train or plane or port. And I really hope that we see a lot less road traffic for some of those imports and a lot more on the trains. Especially if you build the trains, it would be great to see it be very impactful, because it seems like you could spend a lot of time and money building a port that is then connected to a train network that goes into your city, to where things can be imported via an outside connection, a port connection, and then brought to several cargo areas inside the city and try to minimize traffic. Solutions that way, rather than just making the AI and the roads better, which they certainly have done that too. But I'm very excited, and I hope you are too. I want to know all the thoughts and the opinions and things that you've seen, and what you like and maybe what you don't like, or what you hope to see in City Skylines upon its release in October of 2023, October 24th. And hopefully we get ourselves the best game ever when it comes to building cities. There's certainly a lot more I want to see here in terms of things from Cities XL, and some things that seem to be missing from the original City Skylines. But, this is a business that's in the business of making money, and so they've got to leave some things out to then make you want more. But I really don't think that there's any reason why I wouldn't want more of City Skylines. All right, everyone, comment your thoughts and opinions down below. You have yourself a fantastic afternoon, good evening, good night, and I'll see you all very soon for more City Skylines on the channel, and of course, City Skylines 2. Take care.